Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. My name is Ariel Molino with the SANCOP team. I'm based in Nairobi. We're super excited to be hosting this session today in advance of the SANCOP Africa Summit, which is happening next week, March 2nd to 4th. We're hosting today's session in partnership with DIV to sort of demystify DIV funding. So you have an open Q&A with the DIV team here. And DIV will actually be we're hosting another session in partnership with DIV actually at the SANCOP Summit. So you'll have another chance to connect with some of these folks, probably specifically Liz, I'm guessing, next week directly at SANCOP. So welcome everyone. Would be great as you all join, just let us know where you're dialing in from in the chat, would be fantastic. Again, a very warm welcome, and I will hand it over to Liz. And Liz, just let me know when you're ready to pull up the slides and I will do so.
Great, thank you, Ariel. Feel free to pull up the first slide. And while you're doing that, I will just start into things. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from wherever you're dialing in from. Thank you to everyone who's joining us to learn more about Development Innovation Ventures, DIV. We're excited to introduce DIV to you and to demystify it. My name is Liz Chaco, and I'm an Innovation and Partnerships Advisor on the DIV team. I evaluate applications, collaborate in shaping promising applications, work on our technical assistance program, and explore partnership opportunities for DIV. My co-presenters today are my colleague Alex Spivak and Sangha Moses, who works at Impact. Impact is a former DIV grantee. They'll be joining later on in the conversation. I'm also joined by my colleague, Courtney Calvin, who will be helping us with logistics and managing the chat box. Before jumping into things, I'd like to just poll the crowd to ask what your understanding of DIV is. For those of you joining via Zoom, please take a moment to answer the question that should be popping up on your screens momentarily, and let us know if your understanding is high, low, neutral. The poll will be up for about 30 seconds. And while you're responding to the poll, I'll run through a few logistics. For about the first 15 minutes, I'll be providing an overview about DIV to familiarize yourselves with what DIV is. Then we'll move into the question and answer portion. Alex and Sangha will join me to answer your questions at that point. We will be answering questions that were submitted at the time of registration. If there's time at the end, we'll take additional questions submitted via the chat box. The audience is muted throughout this session, so please do use the chat function to share your comments and questions. This session is being recorded and will be made publicly available for within a few days. If you registered for this session, we'll send a follow-up email with materials about DIV. Now, let's take a second to look at the results from the poll, if it's ready. Okay, so it looks like we have a mix here of people who don't have a really good understanding, or maybe so-so, and then a small group that has a fairly good understanding. Here's another poll question for you, particularly for those of you that already do know about DIV. What's holding you back from applying to DIV? And that will also be open for 30 seconds or maybe a little bit shorter. While everyone answers that, I'll give you a little bit of DIV's history. So Ariel, if you could advance to the next slide. The one after that. Great. DIV began in 2010, co-founded by Dr. Michael Kremer, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in Economics, the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2019, and Moira O'Neill, who previously led USAID's Global Development Lab, which is now the Innovation, Technology, and Research Hub within the Bureau for Development, Democracy, and Innovation. Over the last decade, DIV has made 225 awards across 47 countries, impacting 55 million beneficiaries. If we can move to the next slide. And according to an analysis that Dr. Creamer did on the DIV portfolio, a small sample of DIV's early awards generated $5 in social benefit for every dollar invested. So now let's go back to seeing what the answers to the second poll question were. Okay, so it looks like there's some concerns about the requirements being a little too complicated and not having worked with USAID before. So just so you know, you don't have to have worked with USAID before. Over 50% of DIV grantees are new to USAID. And we hope that after today's session, you'll have a much better understanding of DIV's criteria and whether it's a fit for you. Over the next few slides, and if we could advance to the next slide. Over the next few slides, I'll walk you through what DIV is, what it offers, the application process, and what our portfolio looks like today. If we can go to the next slide. So what is DIV? DIV is USAID's open innovation program that tests and scales creative solutions to any global development challenge in any country where USAID operates, in any sector from anyone, which includes for-profits and nonprofits, and that also includes social enterprises, researchers, academic institutions, faith-based organizations, and governments. Next slide. Defining innovation. So we cast a very broad net for what's innovative, and that can mean new technologies, products, services, new ways of delivering or financing services and goods, new ways of increasing uptake of existing proven solutions, or policy shifts based on learnings from behavioral economics. In the past, we've funded innovators with solutions for off-grid energy to households, rats that can sniff out tuberculosis, road safety sticker campaigns, and affordable clean drinking water from kiosks. If we can move to the next slide. DIV uses a tiered funding model that allows USAID to make small, calculated bets to test promising ideas and invest more resources in the highest impact and most cost-effective solutions. There are 4 different funding windows. Stage 1 provides up to $200,000 and is for piloting innovations that are past the prototype stage. Stage 2 provides up to $1.5 million. It's for testing and positioning for scale. Stage 3 provides up to $5 million, and it's for transitioning to scale. The 4th window is for evidence generation of existing development solutions that do not have a rigorous evidence base, such as the economic and social benefits of footbridges. To be clear, we support evidence generation at every funding window. The key distinction is that stages 1 through 3 are for new solutions instead of an existing solution. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll walk you through a few examples in our portfolio. Before I move on to talk about DIV's core principles, I'd like to know more about your fundraising journeys. If you could take a moment to answer the upcoming poll, it has 2 parts. So first we'll ask you what types of funding you've raised previously, and please select as many as are applicable. And then the follow-up question is, how much money have you raised to date? If we can move on to the next slide. DIV has 3 core principles: rigorous evidence of impact, cost effectiveness, and viable pathways to scale and sustainability. When considering rigorous evidence of impact, we want to know, what's the theory of change? How plausible is it? And what evidence do you have to support it? When we consider cost effectiveness, we want to know, how are you generating more impact per dollar with your solution and how that compares to alternatives? How is it cheaper, faster, better? When we talk about scale, we are looking for solutions that can positively impact millions of lives in 10 years. The pathway to Sustainability could be through public, private, or a combination of those means. If we can move to the next slide, great. So the bar for each criteria varies depending on the stage of funding, the amount of funding, and whether it'll be scaled through public or commercial sources. At stage 1, because the innovation is still at a very early stage, we don't require rigorous evidence, such as a randomized control trial or an impact evaluation, but expect the award would help build towards the point where evidence would be available. Evidence we would like to see at the time of application or be generated during the grant period includes a customer willingness to pay study, a market demand study, or a cost effectiveness study. For commercial innovations at stage 2, we expect theory of change to be evidence-based, but the solution doesn't have to have causal evidence of impact yet. For commercial solutions, we also expect to see a strong case of market viability, which could mean showing that revenues could exceed all costs. It could also mean showing that your innovation can attract commercial capital on market terms or concessional capital due to your social impact. For innovations that will be scaled through public funds, we expect there is rigorous evidence of causal impact, or the award is contributing to generating that evidence. Upon entry at stage 3, publicly scaled innovations must have causal evidence of impact. For instance, the number of lives saved, additional income generated, emissions reduced, or increase in vaccination rates. Commercial innovations should be able to prove they have long-run market viability, meaning customer willingness to pay for all the costs or ability to attract commercial capital on market terms. The data speaks to social outcomes and the evidence that the social benefits are greater than the costs. Regardless of the stage, all innovations should be able to speak to how they are cost-effective compared to alternatives. Now, if we can move on to the next slide. As you can tell, DIV has broad parameters, which means they're open to a huge variety of solutions. But there are a few things that DIV will not fund. We don't fund pre-prototypes, innovations that are only at an idea or lab testing stage. Similarly, we won't fund basic scientific research, lab testing of a prototype with no field testing. Because we're seeking impactful solutions that can scale, we won't fund interventions that don't have a clear pathway to scale, evidence of impact, or are not cost effective. So meaning just like a furniture store or building schools or constructing orphanages. Those wouldn't be a good fit. We also won't fund innovations with limited potential for scale and replication to other contexts, such as programs that target very rare diseases. DIV is focused on impacting the base of the pyramid and won't fund innovations that lack a focus on customers or end users at the base of the pyramid. However, that doesn't mean that you can't have a diversified customer base. Measuring impact is critical to DIV, so we won't fund intermediaries with an indirect impact, which means incubators, accelerators, conveners. Similarly, planning or diagnostic tools like business assessment scorecards are difficult to directly connect to measurable development impacts, and are also not a good fit. As impact of evidence is a core criteria, we also won't fund innovations that lack a clear theory of change, like investigative journalism. So if we can move to the next slide. And the next one after that. I think we skipped a slide. Yes, thank you. So now that I've laid out what DIV looks for, let's look at what DIV can offer. DIV provides flexible grants, which means it can be used for a wide variety of inputs and activities such as staff, rent, research, technology upgrades, things that often other funders will not support. In addition to the grant, we provide grantees venture assistance. This means we procure business development support services such as sales training, back office accounting services, fundraising support, which are meant to help grantees move beyond their operational challenges and achieve their impact. And every grantee is assigned a grant management team to work with them during the life of the grant. The team is a resource that helps grantees navigate USAID, make connections with USAID's other technical and country-specific offices, and provide access to DIV's external network of partners. If we can move to the next one. And right after that. Thanks. On average, DIV's application process can span anywhere from 6 to 12 months, give or take. The process has two phases. First, there is an online application with about 15 questions. And before starting the application, we highly recommend reading the annual program statement, or the APS, which is on DIV's website and on this slide. The annual program statement elaborates on DIV's core principles and specifies the criteria by stage. The website has a sample application, which you can download and work on before submitting it through our online portal. And if you choose to apply after this session, we recommend including SANCALP 2021 as your referral source. If we can move to the next slide. Next slide, yeah. If we think an application meets our criteria, and then we move into the next phase, which is the due diligence phase. At this stage, the diligence team will ask a series of follow-up questions of the applicant and consult experts about the application. This process can take several months, and we keep applicants informed throughout the process. If an application is approved for funding after the diligence phase, you should be proud because only 1 to 2% of applicants are approved for funding. At that point, it will take another few months to finish the paperwork and award negotiation process. If we can move to the next slide. By now, you might be wondering what our portfolio looks like. Over the last 10 years, we have mostly funded stage 1 and stage 2 grants. This isn't on purpose, rather it's driven by the type and quality of applications we receive. If we look at the next slide. So earlier I mentioned we can fund nearly any type of organization. And as it turns out, the majority of grants have been to nonprofits and commercial entities. If we can go to the next slide. This slide shows you that we have innovations across Latin and South America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Asia. If USAID has a presence there, we can support an innovation tackling a development challenge there. And the next slide. Over half our portfolio has been to innovators operating throughout Africa. And the next 3 examples are all companies operating in the region. Again, it's not on purpose. It's just a matter of the quality and type of applications that we receive. If we can move to the next slide. So some of you might be familiar with Safe Boda. It's a ride-hailing motorcycle company that won a stage 1 grant to improve road safety among Boda drivers in Uganda, because Uganda has one of the highest rates of motor vehicle accidents in the world. DIV supported Safe Boda during its very early days to operate and expand in Kampala. Today, it has grown to 1 million customers across Uganda, Kenya, and Nigeria, and raised Series B financing. Next slide. Earth Enable is based in Rwanda and is a good example of a grant that has won both the stage 1 and stage 2 grant. Earth Enable is a social enterprise that developed an affordable sealant that turns regular unsealed dirt floors into healthy, safe earthen floors for the low income. DIV's support at stage 1, just after they started operating, allowed them to test different business models. Their stage 2 grant is supporting a randomized control trial to assess their health impacts. They have expanded to Uganda and served 8,000 families in Rwanda and Uganda. If we can move to the next slide. Zola which you might have also heard of, provides solar home systems to off-grid homes across 5 countries in West and East Africa. It is one of the few examples in our portfolio that has secured all 3 stages of funding. DIV provided stage 1 funding within Zola's first year of operations, which enabled it to pilot affordable solar leasing services in Tanzania. Stage 2 and 3 enable them to grow and gather more evidence on their economic viability and scalability. Today, Zola has raised more than 200 million in debt and equity and provided energy to over 1 million people. If we can move to the next slide. After today's session, if you're interested in applying to DIV, please go to the DIV landing page at usaid.gov/DIV. From there, you can access the annual program statement, the application, and FAQs. And please do include that your referral source is SANCALP 2021. And now I'll turn it over to Alex and check if our special guest Sangha is also on the line. And we'll start the Q&A portion of today's programming.
So Liz, I have Sangha on the line. He's actually on the phone in my office, so he's been following along. I'm not sure how clearly we'll be able to hear him, but he's here. So Alex, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Ariel, and thank you, Liz. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Spivak, and today we will have a Q&A session with Sangha Moses. Sangha is founder and CEO of Impact, formerly known as EcoFuel Africa, recipient of 2 DIV grants. Sangha, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Sangha, to start, would you mind telling us a little bit about your organization and what you did with your DIV grants?
Sorry, Alex, it looks like Sangha has dropped off the phone. So let me try and get him back in the interim, but I think you guys can move ahead for now. I'll let you know if I can get him back.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Ariel. So with that, I think we will be moving on temporarily to a Q&A portion of the webinar. So Liz, our first question that we received is, what makes a good quality application?
That's a really good question, and we get it often. So we aren't looking for long, beautifully written novels. A good application is one that's written clearly, succinctly, and directly responds to the questions and provides specifics. For example, if we ask you what has been achieved to date and the social outcomes you expect to achieve in 5 years, we want to know details like how many customers have you served, how much revenue have you generated, and over what time frame. What outcomes do you expect to achieve and at what magnitude? We want to understand what are your assumptions underpinning your future projections. We have a sample application on the DIV website, which is worth reviewing because it includes a lot of helpful instructive prompts for every question that give you an example of the type of information and the specificity that we're looking for. We understand that every innovation is at a different stage, and you won't have well-developed answers to everything. That's okay. But please try to be specific and honest with us.
Excellent. Thank you, Liz. And another one of the questions that came in prior to the webinar was, does DIV have any priorities or priority sectors?
So another really popular question that we get, and I know that everyone often asks about, are there specific interests in SDG goals or specific sectors and geographies, or thematic interests in terms of youth employment or gender equity? You might hear about USAID funding being targeted to those areas. However, DIV is different. We're not like that. As mentioned in the presentation, DIV is sector, geographically, and thematically neutral. If a solution is tackling a problem, in a sector or geography that USAID operates in, it is eligible for consideration by DIV. We remain laser focused on applying our core principles and criteria to an application. We're focused on finding innovative solutions to development challenges that have rigorous evidence of impact, are cost effective, and have that pathway to scale and sustainability. You'll also notice in the annual program statement, we take into consideration the ability to implement and the project team's capabilities.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Liz.
So Alex, turning it over to you. One question that's come through is, do applicants have to have co-funding?
Yeah, that's also a very popular question that we receive. And co-funding is not actually a requirement, though it can definitely strengthen the competitiveness of an application. Commercially scaling applicants at stage 3 might be looking for expansion capital, and DIV expects these types of applicants to have either broken even economically, having revenues that more or less match up to their costs, or have raised capital on commercial terms. So as such, coming to DIV with a track record and strategy for securing long-term funding on commercial terms could indeed make an applicant more competitive at the stage 2 and stage 3 levels.
Thanks, Alex. Another question we received was, do applicants have to have a randomized control trial to apply to DIV?
Yeah, so you do not need to have an RCT to apply to DIV, and many of our grantees did not have them upon applying. It really depends on the stage of funding you're applying for and whether you're scaling through public or commercial means. Innovations that scale publicly or with philanthropic funding should indeed have rigorous evidence of impact by the end of a stage 2 award, perhaps with funding to implement the RCT from the DIV grant itself. Innovations that scale through the commercial sector should demonstrate that there is demand for a product or service, that there is a willingness to pay, and make a convincing argument that the innovation could reasonably be expected to have the desired impact. They are also free to propose the implementation of an RCT, but this isn't a requirement. Evidence of impact from an RCT demonstrating that the applicant has achieved a given impact can make an applicant relatively more competitive. At the same time, an applicant can also rely on relevant, rigorous evidence collected by others. For example, perhaps a mental health intervention can reasonably be assumed to have positive impacts given existing RCT evidence.
Thanks, Alex. Next question for you. Can DIV talk to individual organizations about ideas before the application is submitted?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Liz. So we frequently have organizations reaching out to us to try to get some feedback on their application or their idea prior to applying to DIV, and unfortunately, we're not able to do so. To comply with US government procurement rules that require fair competition, we cannot accommodate individual requests to comment on specific innovation ideas or proposals and whether they'd be a good fit for DIV before the application is submitted. Once you press submit on the application, DIV can engage in open discussions with any applicant it would like. This can frequently entail a process of co-creation where the diligence team working on the application collaborates with the applicant to adjust project activities in such a way that project activities are better aligned with the applicants as well as DIV's objectives. We see this frequently as a win-win for both the applicant as well as DIV. So turning things back over to you, Liz, what does DIV mean when it says scaling?
Because DIV is focused on impact, we define scale as reaching millions of people within 10 years. We understand that it's hard to predict what kind of reach or that kind of reach with certainty so far in advance, which is why we ask you to explain your assumptions in an application or during the due diligence phase. This is also why we typically won't fund intermediaries like incubators. It'd be very hard for an incubator to point to directly or even indirectly impacting millions of lives because they can usually only track the number of businesses they've supported.
And Liz, can my enterprise or can any of our participants' enterprises submit an application for more than one innovation?
Absolutely. We will accept more than one application at a time from an organization, as long as each application is unique and for a separate innovation. For example, we supported Demagi in testing and scaling CommCare, a case management platform for frontline workers. Now we're supporting them in developing and testing a new function using artificial intelligence that'll help frontline workers identify problems like high-risk pregnancies early. We would also consider an applicant that submits one application for an energy project and another one for a separate agricultural project.
And can an applicant apply multiple times, even if it's already been rejected?
Definitely. You are welcome to apply again after a rejection. If you have entered the diligence phase, we always provide targeted feedback that we hope will be useful to you in either reapplying to DIV or applying to other funding opportunities. So Alex, back to you. Does an applicant have to start at stage 1, or can it apply for a different stage?
So an applicant can actually apply at any stage appropriate for where their innovation is in its development. Here, we'd like to recommend that you remember not to focus on the amount of funding that you hope to receive, but rather on where the innovation is itself in its development. If for some reason you misclassify the stage at which you are, for example, maybe you apply at the stage 3 level and DIV doesn't share that opinion based on your application, maybe we think you're at the stage 2 level, we're free to engage also in co-creation, as I mentioned previously. Part of this process could be reshaping your application into one for a different stage of funding. This would occur after the DIV team has already read your application and after it enters the diligence process. Okay,
here's another one for you. Can a small island like Bermuda, with a population of 63,700 miles from the US, serve as a test case for rural Africa? What would it take?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. When evaluating your achievements to date, we consider if the innovation was tested under the same or similar conditions that you can expect when scaling. Here, you would really need to convince us how the setting in Bermuda could be generalized and applied to other settings, such as, for example, rural Africa.
Okay, here's another one for you. Does DIV aim for certain financial returns through our investments?
Yeah, so DIV, when DIV says investment, here what we really mean is that we provide grants and do not seek any reimbursement. Rather, what we're really looking for with our grants are social returns. So the social impact that your solution generates for the beneficiaries that you're serving. However, at the same time, because we focus on scale and financial sustainability, as part of our evaluation of a proposal, we do indeed consider the profitability of commercial innovations and the potential for investment later on by commercial and/or impact investors.
So, thanks, Alex. Sorry to interrupt, Alex, but
sure.
I understand that Sanga's back on the line, so maybe we can try and turn back to Sangha for a couple of questions, and then we'll go through the remaining ones that we have after we've heard from him, if that works.
Yeah, excellent. Sangha, are you on the line?
And so sorry about every really, but I'm here.
Yeah, no, not to worry. Totally understand. And again, we do appreciate you joining us on this session. Sangha, so you are the founder and CEO of Impact, formerly known as EcoFuel Africa. EcoFuel Africa has received 2 DIV grants. Maybe to start, would you mind telling us a little bit about what your organization does and what you did with your DIV grants?
Okay, yes. Thank you so much. First of all, yes, my name is Sangha. Everyone, I'm very sorry. I've been trying to connect forever, but got a few internet challenges here. But yes, my name is Sangha. I'm the CEO and founder of an organization that was formerly called EcoFuel Africa, but recently rebranded to Impact. And what we do is we turn waste into clean cooking fuel that is an alternative to charcoal. And recently we also introduced a clean cook stove that is affordable and locally made. And we work with groups of women and youth across villages in Uganda, and recently we are expanding to Kenya. So basically, that's what we do.
And Sangha, what did you do with your DIV grants? If you could summarize what kinds of activities you worked on.
Yes, we got 2 DIV grants. We first got a small grant of 100,000 to pilot a new model. Formerly, we used to produce all the briquettes ourselves, but then as we grew, we realized that we couldn't collect enough waste from the villages because most of the villages are remote and can't be accessed with, they have no roads that connect them to other roads. So we found difficulties of gathering waste from different villages to our production facilities to produce fuel. So we got a big grant to pilot a new model whereby we wanted to see if we could empower villages to produce their own fuel, just enough for them to meet their energy needs, to eliminate the need to ship fuel across for long distances, which makes it more expensive and which is not sustainable in the long run. And we piloted that model, and it was so successful. And we got a full grant of $1 million to create a revolving loan fund that we now use to empower groups of women in Uganda to start their own energy village-based and micro franchises that do what we used to do centrally, but now we have created a decentralized model of these groups that produce enough fuel and that make a village energy sufficient. So basically, that's what we did with the big grant.
All right, excellent. Thank you for that, Sangha. Sangha, a couple of questions about DIV. I think members of our viewing audience would benefit from your perspective as a former grantee. Perhaps you can tell us about what DIV means when we say that we'd like to know an organization's theory of change.
So for us, when DIV wants to know our theory of change, for EcoFuel, basically we try to clarify how change happens, the kind of progress and success, how that looks like. So we try to map out the kind of progress and success that we expected to get. We also identified and accounted for factors that might affect our success. We also clarified the resources that we needed to create that change. So, for example, for us, when we are asking DIV for funding, we explained our theory of change. We indicated what change we expect to see in the communities and the resources that we needed to get that change. We also defined what is within or outside our sphere of accountability. So, for example, we also clearly explained the factors that are within our organization, but also outside that could affect the change that we wanted to create. And we also try to clarify the questions. For example, this has something to do with monitoring and evaluation. So what questions, we clarified the questions we wanted to ask, the kind of data we wanted to collect, and how this data would be used to demonstrate evidence of impact that we are going to create in these communities. So we kind of, in a nutshell, we mapped out the entire value chain, the resources needed, and how we are going to collect the data to verify that this impact has happened. So basically, in our experience, when DIV wants to know your theory of change, it basically wants to know what you intend to achieve, the impact you want to have, the resources and the challenges, and how you're going to verify this impact through monitoring and evaluation.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that, Sangha. I think your response does a very good job of feeding into our next question for you. So now I'd like to ask you a little bit about impact in particular. When DIV says that we're looking for evidence of impact, can you tell us a little bit about what you think we're looking for?
Yes. So from our experience, when DIV says they want evidence of impact, basically from our experience, what we provided them was, for example, they're asking like, what questions do you have to demonstrate the impact that your solution is having? What data do you have? Have you collected enough data that can authenticate the impact that you have in the communities where you are? How did you collect this data? How did you analyze this data? How did you verify that the reported impact would have happened without your solution? So from our experience, we realized that also DIV wants for additionality. For example, if DIV did not fund you, will this impact still take place organically? Or is there any additional impact, and can you demonstrate that through data that you can show how you collected, analyzed, and reported? And so basically, this is trying to see if you have strong data that can be peer reviewed and it's free from errors, and they want to know whether you have internal mechanisms of collecting this data, analyzing this data, and reporting it, so that you can demonstrate the impact using strong evidence based on data. I don't know whether that makes sense.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for that, Sangha. I think that makes sense to us. So besides evidence of impact, another one of DIV's core selection criteria is cost effectiveness. Can you tell us about what cost effectiveness means, for example, in the context of EcoFuel?
Yes. So for us, when we are implementing this project, and even now, we try to be to minimize the amount of the cost that we spend as much as possible. But maybe to put it in summarize what we understand with cost effectiveness is having the best possible result for the amount of money you spend. So, for example, we know as entrepreneurs that we have access to very scarce resources. And this is even more now with COVID-19 and all the challenges in the world. So I think DIV wants to know whether you can get the best of your, you can get the best with limited finances, with limited resources, which you can get, maximize all the resources you have to get the best that you can, of course, with all the challenges in communities like ours, where data collection and implementation is very hard. But I think what DIV wants from entrepreneurs is being as cost effective as possible, but also getting the maximum value you can get from the resources you spend.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Sangha. And we do have one last question for you. What's your understanding on whether you are guaranteed a stage 2 grant after a stage 1, or for example, a stage 3 grant after a stage 2?
Yes, thank you. So, from our understanding, there's no guarantee that if you got stage 1, you'll get stage 2. But for us, like EcoFuel, we are able to get stage 2. I think the only guarantee you have is your performance. If you really meet your target and use the resources you get from stage 1, for example, well, and you're able to demonstrate impact with concrete evidence, I think that increases your chances of getting stage 2 or stage 3. But I would say that there is no guarantee really whether you would get another stage after maybe stage 1. There's no guarantee that you get stage 2. But if you can really have outperform your targets and demonstrate your evidence well, that increases your chances significantly of getting stage 2 or stage 3.
So in seeking out your second DIV grant, did you submit a new application for the second grant?
Yes. When we are seeking a stage 2, we submitted a new application. But of course, our success in stage 1 was a huge boost. It increased our chances. So yes, we submitted a new. I don't know now. This is a long time ago. I don't know whether you still need to submit a new application now. But for us, yes, we submitted a new application.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights, Sangha, and thank you for working with us and working through these technical difficulties. It's really great to hear your perspective, and I'm seeing some notes in the chat window that a lot of entrepreneurs on this call are able to relate to you. So thank you very much, and hopefully you can stay on and hear the rest of the webinar, if at all possible.
Thank you so much. We really thank you so much for helping us through these challenges. We shall always be indebted to DIV, and you can't even imagine how much impact DIV changed our lives and the lives of the communities where we work. So thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to share our experiences.
All right, thank you, Sangha. It was great to have you on with us. Now we're going to shift back to address several more of the audience's questions. And if there's enough time at the end, we'll try to go. I see that a couple of additional questions have come through in the chat function. So let's, if Liz is on, let's pivot
Alex,
back to the Q&A.
We can pick up where we left off. I think where we left off was there was a question about how detailed does the activity plan and budget need to be in the application, and can costs be funded retrospectively?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you want to field that, or should I?
Yeah, I can do so.
Okay.
So that is a very good question. We do not expect you to submit a detailed work plan and budget with your application. Rather, what we want to see is that you have thought through the logical and necessary activities to develop or scale your innovation, and can also explain what the main activities will be. We would expect budget categories and figures to reflect those main activities and demonstrate that you have a reasonable basis for what the costs will be to implement the activities. In the sample application that you can download from our website, you'll see some helpful instruction on that. And I believe we have a question for you, Liz. What are some of DIV's innovative solutions?
Well, our portfolio is full of so many amazing innovations and organizations that it's really hard to pick even a couple. So I'll give you a flavor of a few that come to top of mind. We've funded Baba Jobs. It's a job matching platform for informal workers in India. We've also funded Delvic, a sanitation company in Senegal, which is scaling technology that turns human waste into clean drinking water, electricity, and ash. And we've funded Grillo, a Mexican social enterprise that developed an affordable and accurate earthquake early warning system. You can find out about more of the different innovations that we have funded on divportfolio.org, and if you sign up to our newsletter, and I believe Courtney will pop those links in.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Liz. This is another question that I think we get fairly frequently. Does DIV fund or partner with organizations like consultancies and impact funds that support innovators?
So DIV typically doesn't fund intermediaries. Rather, we partner with them during our diligence process and if there are co-funding arrangements. DIV values the opinions of experts operating in the field, supporting innovators, as well as philanthropic funders and investors with similar impact goals. And we have had both formal and informal partnerships in the past. For example, we've collaborated with the Skoll Foundation and Mercy Corps previously. So we've also received a few live questions in the chat, and I think we have just enough time to go through those, and then we'll wrap up if that works. So Alex, I'm happy to lead off with responding to some of the live questions. Does that work?
Yeah, of course.
Sure, great. So one of the questions that came in was, if we're interested in applying for stage 2, do we have to include the design for the rigorous study as part of the application? We're planning on working with an academic partner for this piece and may not have the details at the time of application. So at the end of the grant, DIV will want to know what impacts occurred for an investment that was using an evaluation. It is definitely fine to apply with some details to be worked out in co-creation with DIV and your partners. But the more solid the contours of your evaluation approach, the more competitive your application will be. Another question that we got was, the restriction against planning tools is very broad. What about design planning software tools that reduce the cost and improve impact of infrastructure, like mini grids? So our take on this is, we want to back innovators that are having actual measurable impacts on people. The more funding requested from DIV, the more confidence we want to have that that measurement is credible. For example, larger samples of clients surveyed, compared, measured social impacts on clients versus non-clients, and so on. So the example in the question could possibly compete, but help us know how you can measure what you're delivering and how you know people are better off. And then the final question we have is, do you fund B2B innovations? Or would this be considered indirect impact? For example, a tool that helps mini-grid developers design and develop better projects. So DIV has backed B2B innovators in the past. The fact that it is B2B is not restrictive for DIV's investment thesis. However, not all B2B will be a good fit, and our interest will be case by case. Just as in the previous answer, we want to know how our investment is having measurable impacts on people. So I believe that's it in terms of the additional questions that have come through. So Alex, I'll turn it over to you to wrap up.
All right, thank you for that, Liz. Thank you everyone for joining us today and for your many questions. Over the next weeks, we will be updating the FAQs on our website to reflect many of the great questions that we've received in anticipation of the webinar as well as today. Also, thank you to Sangha from Impact, formerly EcoFuel Africa, for sharing his unique perspective and experience with us today. And thank you, Sangha, for working through some of the technical difficulties we experienced. Before we wrap up, we do have 2 more poll questions for you. The first question is, after listening to this session, will you apply to DIV? So you should be seeing a poll pop up on your screen. Please go ahead and answer that. So as we mentioned at the start of this session, we've recorded this session and it will be posted on the SandCalp YouTube channel as well as on the DIV website in the coming days. So if necessary, you can always refer back to it and share it with others that you think could benefit from this information as well. Now that you are more familiar with DIV, we would like to encourage you to come back next Wednesday at 3 p.m. East Africa time to watch entrepreneurs like yourselves pitch their solutions during a DIV-sponsored innovation pitch simulation. The entrepreneurs will get targeted feedback from a panel of experts at that session. You can register for the session if you are attending SandCalp, or you can watch the live stream on SandCalp's Facebook page. And I believe we have 1 more poll question for you, and that should be popping up on your screen momentarily. All right, so in conclusion, we hope you leave this afternoon's Q&A with a much better understanding of what DIV is, what it can offer you, as well as whether your solution could be a good fit for DIV. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Sangha, and thank you everyone that's helped organize this session.
And many thanks to the IntelliCap team, as well as Courtney, our person on the logistics.
Hey, thanks, Liz. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.